Welcome to another episode of STEM in Stilettos. This is your host, Zofia Morales, and today we are going to discuss going from software engineer to entrepreneur with Haley Gray, who I will introduce shortly. But first, I would like to introduce you to your own self. Uh, each of us has a particular style that we use, and sometimes it evolves, sometimes it's fairly fixed when it comes to our leadership and how we appear in our businesses. And so I put together the leadership pitfall quiz for you to understand a little bit more about the style that is your predominant go-to and what some of the pitfalls are associated with that so that you can make that style work for you even better. You can find that at leadershippitfallquiz.com. That's leadershippitfallquiz.com. And if you take that over one of the commercial breaks here, you will be able to play along with us when we discuss Haley's result later on in the show. Which brings us back around to today's guest, Haley Gray. She is an MBA, an accomplished engineer, business, and marketing strategist. She's known for her deep expertise in helping businesses thrive through data-driven marketing and operations integration. She has a background in engineering and an MBA from Duke University. And she brings a unique analytical and creative approach to business challenges. She's the founder and CEO of In2itive Biz Solutions, LLC, a digital marketing agency dedicated to empowering small businesses and organizations to reach their full potential. She's passionate about delivering exceptional service and going the extra mile to ensure her clients achieve real measurable results. Her agency focuses on providing personalized marketing strategies tailored to each client's needs, leveraging tools like automation, CRM, SEO, content marketing, and paid ads to build effective, scalable marketing funnels. Known for her unwavering commitment to ethics, she ensures her agency maintains the highest standards in the industry, never compromising on quality or integrity. Welcome, Haley. It's so good to have you here with me.
It is exciting to be here with you.
It's been so long since we've had a good conversation like this.
It is. It has
Not
been.
the first podcast we've done together.
No, it is not.
So, tell me a little bit about your experience back in the day in tech, because you didn't start in marketing. This was an evolution for you.
It was.
So, how do you find your way into the guy's realm of technical engineering?
So I have always loved computers. And growing up, my dad was an engineer. My dad was a mechanical engineer. Actually built control system software for aluminum reduction plants for Reynolds Aluminum for his entire career. I got a PC Junior when I was 12 years old.
Love that. Best Christmas present ever.
Ever, right? And it was. And, learning DOS and, how to install operating systems. And then, messing with computers, trash 80s in high school. And I started as an architecture major in college. And it was really interesting because that was right when AutoCAD was coming out and computers were taking over a ton of design stuff. And I was at Auburn University drawing in all my little bricks and rendering hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of little
Little
bricks.
tiny bricks.
And, it became really clear that computers were completely revolutionizing the entire architecture field. And I talked to a lot of people that were in the industry, and they were basically telling me to get out of it because there weren't jobs. And we were seeing a lot of the biggest architecture firms in, Chicago and Boston and other large cities, basically massively downsizing. And just like we're going through an AI revolution now, we were seeing that huge digital revolution in the early 90s in architecture. And so
Yeah. Yeah,
I
my
decided,
sister did AutoCAD at the beginning of her career
right, yeah,
and ran out of runway around 2000. Yeah.
yeah, exactly right. And I just decided to go into computer science because I've always loved computers. I've always thought they were a lot of fun. They're fun to play with. And so in 1992, after I got married, I transferred to NC State and switched majors from architecture to computer science. And part of the deal with my parents was they would pay for me to go to college anywhere I could go in state. So
Ah,
my husband was a resident of the state of North Carolina. So if we got married, I got around that, loophole or so
in
I got
state versus
in
outstate.
state.
Yes.
And I was going to switch to computer science anyway. And so switched into computer science and off we went. And learned early on, doing programming. We started in Pascal. And our first programming class, we actually switched to C++ halfway through our first programming
Oh,
class.
wow. I
And
loved Pascal. I really
right.
liked it.
And, the beginning of the internet, and I was working at IBM as a intern doing mainframe support and working on, 3270 terminals and learning how to do ICAs of the big mainframe systems and pulling cables and doing all the things. And it was a ton of fun. And I went to work eventually at IBM as a software engineer. Fast forward a few years, had a family, eventually left IBM in 2005, went to go work for a startup. That startup failed, so I went back into corporate while I was pregnant with my fourth child, and I went to go work for EMC, and I worked there for 7 years and went to get my MBA during that time, graduated with my MBA in 2013, and I'm like, you know what? Dealing with my dad and dealing with family and everything else. And, computer engineering is such an interesting world that it's so narrow in a lot of ways. And I was very much a square peg in a round hole.
Mhm.
And I'm
Yes.
like, okay, my manager kept telling me I was going to leave. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to leave. I really want to get promotion. And then, you start seeing the layoffs in the company and everything else. And looking at the numbers and looking at career projection, I'm like, fine, I'll leave. Okay.
You keep
I'm
you keep predicting I will fulfill your prophecy.
exactly right. And I am never writing another line of code ever again.
Uh
Right?
we see these things.
We say these things, you say them, and the universe laughs hysterically.
Absolutely.
So I went out and I started a home care agency and I built my first website and I paid all this money for branding. And then I was doing some consulting and I'm doing all these other things. And people kept coming to me going, hey, my website's half done, half broken, half whatever. And it's a mess. And I was already doing social media because found out that, social media and algorithms and stuff are very similar to like algorithms. And
Imagine that.
right. So it just became that, well, fine, I'll fix your website. Okay, fine.
Fine.
This for you. Fine, I'll do that. And the next thing you know, I ended up selling my home care agency after a series of events in my family and started focusing full time on the marketing side. And, it's really interesting being an engineer getting into marketing. Just such a very interesting world. And being so highly technical and looking at this stuff and going, why can't people make this stuff work?
It's so straightforward and logical. Just do it.
Should
because
be.
because we're not naturally, some of us, straightforward and logical.
Right.
Um, so kind of rewinding through this long path that you just led us down. Um, you mentioned that you worked for Big Blue, IBM,
Mhm.
early in your career. You worked for another big name. What was it?
EMC.
EMC, who all of the data drive storage type stuff.
Mhm.
Um, and there was a startup in between. Talk to us a little bit about your experience with those different cultures.
Right. It was really interesting. When I was working at the startup, we had a lot more women working there. So, there really wasn't the same like weirdness. But it was interesting because when I was working at IBM, I had a female manager who was a lovely person. And there were actually a few other women engineers in my group. And just to go back to say, when I graduated from NC State in 96, about 26% of our graduating class was women.
Yeah.
That number has steadily dropped in the ensuing decades. And there's a lot of reasons for it. But I mean, the reality is, it was an interesting time because IBM was winning a ton of awards for, being super friendly for working moms and everything else. And for me, it was kind of a mixed bag. I mean, I got weird comments from my female manager about, nursing my child. How long are you going to do that for?
Yeah.
Every time I would go out on maternity leave, I would have an office to myself, and I would come back and I would have an office mate all of a sudden. And when I was in Tivoli, they made us a nursing room in the building in the bathroom.
Oh,
And,
that's terribly unsanitary.
but that's kind of the environment that we were in. So, it was just really interesting. And I had comments that were made about, what kind of childcare I had. And it was just a very interesting environment, with working with women at the
Yeah.
time.
I
Um,
I kind of want to rewind a second and dig into the childcare arrangements because I know this is something that women struggle with, especially if they feel called to have a family, if they're able to have a family. Some of us are not so
right,
lucky. Um, but it can be challenging. It can be very expensive, and a lot of
true,
times the family says, "Well, we've had one child, now we've had two children, and now, it's costing us almost as much as you're making to send 3 kids to daycare."
right,
So, I know you made an interesting choice around that I think a lot of people don't even consider.
right. So one of the things that we did, my first child was a preemie. Um, so my first child was born at 28 weeks. So putting her in daycare was not an option. Not working was also not an option at the time. Um, so we had always thought about having a nanny or even having an au pair. So we ultimately ended up deciding on having an au pair because our first child could not go into daycare due to the risks of RSV and other issues with a compromised immune system and a kid who had spent, you know, weeks on a ventilator and then months on oxygen. Daycare just wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, it wasn't gonna be good for her, and the daycares weren't going to want her either.
Right. And even if we had gotten into daycare. And so ultimately that ended up being a really good choice. So we had au pairs for 17 years. Many au pairs. We had 23 au pairs. There were times where we had 2 au pairs at a time. There were times where we just had 1 au pair at a time. We had all the ups and downs that went with au pairs. Absolutely. But I would say overall a pretty fantastic experience. And an au pair is a cross between a foreign exchange student and a nanny before somebody asks what that is. And they're here to
Yes.
learn English. So part of my background is that I didn't grow up here in the United States. So I tend to speak Spanish and Portuguese pretty fluently because that's where I grew up in Venezuela and Brazil. And that meant that most of those Spanish and Portuguese speaking countries were kind of off the map because they were coming here to learn English.
Yeah.
And so we tended to stick to mostly German au pairs because they knew how to drive. They had fairly rigorous driving standards in those countries.
Yes.
And, we had good experiences overall with German au pairs, but we had au pairs from the former Soviet Republic of Georgia. We had au pairs from Belgium. We had one au pair from Mexico, and lo and behold, he did not learn how to speak any English. Uh, Shock, horror. Um, so yeah, we had au pairs. They come here for 12 months. They can extend up to 24. And it is a more affordable option. And because you're not exposing your child to daycare, you don't have as many of the same issues with illness and sickness and all of those things. And it becomes a much more affordable option the more kids you have. Obviously, by
Yes.
the time we had 4 kids, it was definitely a more affordable option, but it is worth noting that it's still not inexpensive because you are incurring a ton of expense for not just the au pair and their expenses, but things like a phone line and car expenses and insurance and all the things that go with it. So it's
Yeah.
not super inexpensive. It did eat a massive percentage of my salary.
Yeah, I'm sure it did, but again, at a certain point, the cost balance kind of tips in favor of it as you get increasing number of kids in the family.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and I think the other thing, because I like thinking outside the box, the other thing is to do like a nanny share, an au pair share
Mhm.
with another family, and that's another way to make these kinds of things uh, more affordable and kind of think outside of the daycare box a little bit.
Well, and one of the things to think about is that you cannot legally share an au pair with somebody else because
Mm,
you can legally share a nanny, which brings it down to about the same cost as an au pair, but you cannot legally share an au pair because of the
that's important
kind
to
of
know.
visa they come in on. Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Okay.
have to go through an agency and they have to sponsor the visa. And there's a ton of visa requirements for a actual formal au pair.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know.
Yeah. But
So,
yeah,
yes.
it's a challenge, to be a working mom, to balance childcare and meal prep and activities and school. And yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
and I've gotta say you are the queen of balancing that kind of thing. I have watched you in action and some of the stuff you do, and it's like, "Dang, I don't have kids and I can't get all that done."
here, let me throw some plates in the air, try to spin them, and hope that not too many of them crash.
Exactly. Exactly. So I know you got some pushback from managers and colleagues around childcare and some of this kind of stuff.
Mm.
Did you find that there was, that was a generalized thing, or were some genders more supportive than others?
I found that it depended. It really was very dependent on the individual manager. Um, that I think the men in general were actually more supportive than the women. Um,
Really?
that the women were sometimes okay and sometimes they were not okay. It really depended on the person, but the men in general were more supportive of me having children or childcare issues or needs or parent care issues later on, than the women were, and more understanding. The women were a bit more of that, there's only space in this area for one woman and it's going to be me or the dog in the manger. And if you don't do it my way, then you're doing it wrong. Or
Ah,
if you're not making the same decisions I am, that kind of confrontation.
yeah, then you're making the wrong decision, which, yeah, I've run into that myself as well. Yeah. There's more than one way to crack this nut.
Absolutely.
And I think that's part of the reason that it's important to have these conversations, because I think it's easy to get in your own head and go, well, my way is right. And if you partake in conversations like this, it starts to like broaden your vistas a little bit, so you can say, okay, well, maybe that way works for somebody else, even if it's not the choice that I would make. So yeah, fostering a little understanding and compassion, I guess. So we
Right.
are up on our first break already. Can you believe? So what I'd like to do is invite you, everyone who's joined us here today, to take a couple of seconds over this break and go to leadershippitfallquiz.com and find out what your leadership animal is. And that way you'll be ready for that discussion when it comes along here after the break. Before we go there, I will mention that when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the biggest challenges facing female developers and whether women actively sabotage each other or not. So hang with us. We'll be right back.
Oh, check the loud, but we'll hear. Tech is ours and we show no fear. No fear. No fear. No fear.
Thanks for hanging in with us through the break. This is Zofia Morales, and I am here with Haley Gray. And we are fixing to discuss what are some of the biggest challenges facing women developers today.
Oh boy.
And talk to us about that a little bit, Haley. What do you notice?
I think that there's a lot of different challenges that face women in, development engineering. in general. I mean, one is the fact that we're such a tiny minority. You know, women are not pursuing software engineering at nearly the same rates that they were 20 or 30 years ago. A lot of schools, engineering schools. My older son is actually pursuing his PhD in computer science, cybersecurity, and networking right now. And women are a tiny fraction of his class. They are a tiny minority, not even 10%. And
Do you have a theory on why that is?
I have a number of theories on why that is. I think that girls in general are dropping out of STEM fields and out of pursuing STEM fields in middle school. I saw that with both of my Girl Scouts troops that I used to lead. I was a Girl Scout leader for 16 years. And I saw a lot of girls be gung-ho into math and science until they hit the hard stuff in middle school. And girls are really good at following directions. We're really good at sitting down, shutting up, and doing the thing and following the rules and being rule followers. And boys, they're not so good at that. Not early on anyway. They learn really early that school is hard. And so girls in general, if they're reasonably intelligent, find that school is super easy. They don't have to do anything except show up, maybe do the homework, and they're fine. And then
pay attention, do your homework, you're good. Yeah.
Middle school hits and all hell breaks loose. They suddenly struggle with classes. And I did too. Like when I hit algebra 2, my life totally changed. You know, it was not a sit down, shut up, and just do whatever. Suddenly I was having to do those geometric proofs and I was having to do those things. And I really struggled with some of that math. And it took me a hot minute to really learn how to start overcoming some of that harder stuff. So
what got you over that hump?
My parents sat me down, and my mother had been a math major in college and my dad was an engineer. So, I mean, there was definitely some familial pressure of if we can do it, you can do it too. But they sat me down and I had a math tutor who sat there and worked me through the things that I was not getting line item by line item. And I learned to start asking more questions and asking for help where I was having trouble. So that definitely, once I finally got over the hump, in 9th grade with algebra 2, started doing a lot better. But it was that repetition and learning that I had to do every single homework problem. Whereas before I could have done 1 or 2 and boom, I had it. It was easy, no problem. That's one of it, right?
Well, and I think you mentioned kind of advocating for understanding in the classroom as well.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You know, raising your hand and going, I don't get that, say it again a different way.
Right. And it's hard to say, hey, I don't get that, say it a different way. And sometimes that is getting a tutor or, you know, going to help outside of class or doing whatever, not necessarily drawing attention to yourself. You know, so I would say
I just had this little window into my challenges when I was growing up, because I would do that. I would be like, tell me this differently. And I got picked on, I have to admit.
Right, exactly. Right. And you do get picked on if you raise too much attention on yourself, and you're not cute and you're not blonde and bubbly.
And if you've got glasses before everybody else and braces before everybody else. Yes.
Yeah. And I didn't get the glasses until I was in my 40s, but I definitely had the braces and the brown hair and all the things. And people still thought I was an airhead. But, you know, there's definitely some real challenges there. And then, you know, the other thing too, and I've seen it even like with my niece, my sister-in-law looked at me recently and said, you know, my daughter is thinking about going into computer science. Should she go into computer science? I'm not sure it's a stable field.
Well, first of all, I have news. There aren't any of those.
Right. But if you look at where we have seen a drop in the field, right? In the numbers over the last 30 years. 2001, we saw a major stock market crash, the tech crash. And women started seeing software engineering as a not secure field. So they stopped pursuing software engineering, computer science, electrical engineering, computer engineering in that time frame.
Yeah,
There was
well,
a
the tech
dramatic,
bubble was a scary thing when it
right?
burst, right? Because everybody up to that point was going, "Oh, it's the new
Right.
Wild
But
West," forgetting that there are, cowboys and Indians who will shoot you.
right. And that things can and do go wrong, right? And that
Yes.
you have to maintain your skills and that it's a constant battle. So in 2001, during that tech bubble, you saw a massive drop in the number of women enrolled in engineering programs. And fast forward to 2008, another massive drop in women in engineering programs. And it has not recovered because engineering is not perceived to be necessarily computer engineering, computer science, a stable field. And the word on the street hasn't gotten any better. Like when we introduced the cloud in 2009, 2010, when we started going everything cloud-based, right? The noise made it sound like it was a dangerous place to be.
Yeah.
And now we're dealing with a world where there is a ton of AI and everybody's like, oh my God, they're going to take all of our jobs.
Yeah, well, then there's a lot of AI coding happening now, and so it
Right.
starts to look different. I think one of the things that there are a few things that you brought out there that are interesting. The first is it sounds like a dangerous place to be, and I think part of the reason that women are, what I want to say, concerned by the perceived danger or instability of a job in tech is the fact that so many of us now are heavily responsible for the family's income. We're single mothers, we're part of a double income household that needs both incomes. And when that goes away, it can be financially devastating for a period.
And women psychologically have a need
For
for
safety.
safety and security, and they go after fields that are safe.
or
Nursing
or perceived to be.
or
Yes.
perceived safe, teaching, nursing, et cetera, et cetera. Traditional women's jobs, which haven't always been women's jobs, but the reality is that women are going into fields that they perceive to be safe in some way. So whether that's becoming a veterinarian or a doctor or a nurse, medical fields have traditionally been perceived to be safer than technical fields. You know, chemical engineering or nuclear or oil, those are not necessarily perceived to be as safe, even though there's a ton of jobs, but because, like with petroleum engineering, you're going offshore and on an oil rig potentially.
Yes. And
That's not
shit goes sideways on those things from time to time.
right. And
Yeah.
so, chemical engineering or whatever, you're handling things that are not safe, and women are worried about their health, right? So if it is in any way not safe, and I'm doing this in air quotes, women are less likely to participate. And that can be true of investing in the stock market in all kinds of ways, because women in general tend to be more risk averse in general.
Yeah. Well, we are tasked with preserving the next generation biologically, right?
Right. I mean, and
Yeah.
it's just hormonally, biologically, we are trying to be safe.
Absolutely. Well, and I can attest to making career decisions based on that. That's why I didn't stay in science. I discovered that, you know what, you pretty much die of what you study because you don't know the minimum amount of precaution you need to take with the particular thing you're handling
Right.
until you are a statistic.
Right.
Then the next generation knows. And so I chose to go into data centers, which is, well, computers is what was hooked up to the big magnets in science, and I learned how to program and administer and do all that kind of stuff. So I might as well use it. This was when you had to build your computer before you got to use it.
Right, exactly.
So, in your experience in the working world, do you find that women generally support each other, or are they more likely to sabotage each other? What was your personal experience?
50-50.
Yeah. What was an early flag for you, that someone was gonna be a saboteur as opposed to a supporter?
You know, it's always really subtle, and sometimes you don't know until you've got that knife all the way in.
Sticking out of your ribs, yeah.
Yeah, and you don't really realize until, you get that performance review or something. And it is really, really tough. And you may find people who are absolutely your biggest ally because they're a woman, and in addition to being a woman, or people who are totally, could go either way. They're not necessarily an ally, but they're not necessarily against you. And then you do find those people who just secretly wait, and they're going to get you. And I mean, as much as like DEI has become a huge negative buzzword now, like I remember sitting in a meeting with a male manager at IBM back in the early 2000s and saying, "Hey, we're looking to promote women into management." Great. And I don't think a single woman in that room stepped up, because we're like, we know we're going to have a target on our back if we get promoted in this type of environment.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a challenge because, yeah, the cowboys and the Indians are out there, and some of them are gunning for you.
Right. Yeah. And some of them, are going to be out there looking for you. But yeah.
Yeah, well, and speaking of DEI, famously, recently, the government has slashed all of those initiatives.
Mhm.
How do you see that changing, uh, career trajectories in tech? Or
Um,
do you see it changing it?
I don't. I don't see it particularly changing in tech per se, because we already struggle to have women in tech. Um, Getting women to go into tech is going to be just as hard as it always has been. I would say AI has probably and will continue to have a more material impact on the number of women in tech over DEI. Um, I feel like maybe not all, but many women have largely been allergic to being promoted because they're female, or getting into management because they're female, or anything like that. So yeah, there may be a few here and there, but I think there's other factors that are going to
Yeah.
impact
Well,
women.
and I think there's a lot under that umbrella of because you're female, right?
Mhm.
There there's a lot of biological and social baggage that comes along with being a woman.
Mhm.
You tend to be the designated caretaker, whether you chose it or not, whether you're good at it or not. Um,
I
and
used to be
that's
referred to as the mother of the interns,
yes,
even though I managed, 11 interns in 3 states and had a very large internship program that was highly successful. They still called me the mother. Mhm.
yes, exactly.
I'm not your mother. I'm not here to be your mother. I have enough little whiny brats at home.
I don't
Not
need
your
more in
mother.
the office. Yeah. What are some of the other things you see about being a woman that tends to make women go, management, not so much?
The butt kissing, the fraternizing outside of work that you have to do sometimes. Um, and honestly, trying to have work-life balance. I feel like a lot of women look at it and they are not necessarily into working 40 or 60-hour weeks. They're just trying to have balance. They're just trying to pay the bills. They're just trying to do the things. So they're not necessarily going to step up for even more responsibility than they currently have, because they're already, trying to cram 10 pounds of stuff into a 5-pound bucket.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, um, for the women out there who are not discouraged by this conversation, who are like, I love IT.
Yeah.
I love computing. I love coding. How do I make this work? What is kind of your words of advice on making it work?
Honestly, I would have a little bit of a thick skin because it is a very male-dominated environment. Men are going to make inappropriate jokes regardless, and they don't really mean anything by them. It's kind of
98% of the time.
98% of the time they're not aimed at you. They really don't mean anything by it. And you're just going to have to learn to deal with, adult male sophomoric humor at times. And they can be pretty funny, actually, if you start to kind of get used to it. They're not
If
just
you can channel your inner brosif.
Yeah. They're actually pretty darn funny, and they have a pretty silly sense of humor. And, you got to get used to these introverts, because you're in engineering. 98% of them are introverts, and they're socially awkward. They're probably somewhere spectrum-y, but they don't mean any harm by it.
Yeah. Yeah. And the 2% that do, pretty clearly becomes clear what it is in a
You know where the
hurry.
creeps are. The
Yeah.
creeps
Yeah.
are right
The
off.
creep alarm goes off. Respect that. Absolutely. So why do you think women drop out of tech? The ones who've made it past the hurdles in middle school, who've gone into the thing, who got the degree, who are out there, coding. Why do you think they leave most of the time?
Well, childcare is expensive.
Yep.
Daycare is impossible to manage. I have had more couples that I have known where the wife was a very successful software engineer. They put their kid into daycare. They have that first baby. And lo and behold, the 4th ear infection in 3 weeks, and, or 6 weeks or whatever. And they are at their breaking point, and they're like, oh my gosh, how does anybody work?
Yes.
The answer is most people don't, because it's almost impossible to manage that unless you've got family in town or you have an au pair or a nanny. And then the other thing too is that there's kind of a point where keeping up with the Joneses and keeping up with all the latest technology and all the changes is exhausting.
Yeah. It's true.
If you didn't see 50% of your job change this week, you got lucky.
Yeah. Or you're in a company that's not growing, which is not good for your long-term job survival.
The name of the game is change, and that can be hard to live with.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's one of the reasons that I enjoyed it for as long as I did. I'm one of these weird people who likes change. Bring it on.
More the merrier.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's a certain personality component to it as well. Absolutely. So we are going to be up on our second break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Haley's leadership animal, as well as why she loves her entrepreneurial gig as much as she does. So hang with us. We'll be right back from the break, and make sure you take your quiz at leadershippitfallquiz.com.
Oh, check the loud, but we'll hear. Tech is ours and we show no fear. No fear. No fear. No fear.
Thanks for hanging in with us through the break. This is Zofia Morales, and I am here with the one and the only Haley Gray. So Haley, I seem to recall that you took the Leadership Pitfall quiz. Would you like to share with us what your leadership animal is?
Rhino.
The Rhino, the Renegade Rhino.
Oh, yeah.
And we had a discussion. You mentioned to me that you didn't feel like that was quite accurate. Now, there are 4 leadership animals that I talk about in the quiz. One is the golden retriever. The second is the octopus. The third is the lone wolf. And the 4th one is the renegade rhino, which is what you got. Which is the one that you felt like you might resonate with more?
The retriever.
The golden retriever. And why do you feel like you resonate with the golden retriever?
Um, more of that people pleasing.
Hmm. And do you people please as much as you used to?
No.
No. How do you behave instead now?
Um, boundaries are a beautiful thing.
Yes, they
And
are.
I mean, I would say that the last 6.5 years of my life have been a journey in learning not to give two flips about anything.
Which brings you into Renegade Rhino territory.
Yeah,
Because
I
the
still do.
Renegade Rhino is about this is where I'm going, and you can come along for the ride or not.
Yep. And there is a bit of that for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, I find with recovering golden retrievers, which is what I would probably class you as,
Okay, fair. Fair.
uh, they tend to make better renegade rhinos than an actual from the ground up renegade rhino, because you still bring a lot of the good traits of the golden retriever with you, even though you've learned your boundaries, you've learned to say no, you've learned to say this is the train, get on or not. You do tend to communicate better with the people around you. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah.
Yeah, most rhinos are not real great communicators. They don't try and sell anybody on where the train is going or get any kind of buy-in or feedback. And that tends to be the rhino's shortcoming.
Mhm.
Uh, but a recovering golden retriever who now identifies as a rhino tends to continue to do a really good job of communicating and grabbing for
Right. And
gaining
that was where I felt the discrepancy was, is
the
that I
buy-in.
spend a lot of time when I make a change in my business with my team. I do care, and I make a point of pulling them aside before I make any significant announcements and having those conversations prior to any big announcements being made so that nobody is blindsided,
Yeah, exactly.
and addressing concerns and issues. And if need be, I'm already having those conversations with clients well in advance of changes and that kind of a thing. So it's, yeah, having those conversations and communicating and over communicating, even when I don't feel like it.
Even when you'd rather say, just get on the darn train.
Just hop on the train or fall off the back. Yeah.
One of the two. One of
Mm.
the two. So you mentioned that you went out into entrepreneurship from big tech, basically. I mean, EMC was your last real tech gig before you went out on your own. And interestingly, went into one of those caretaking professions that we mentioned before coming back to your more technical roots. Um, what How has entrepreneurship been supportive for you, and what surprised you about that journey?
I would say that ultimately for me, entrepreneurship has allowed me a ton of freedom that I would not have necessarily had otherwise. My oldest child fell off of a horse in 2015, sustained a traumatic brain injury concurrent with her first major psychotic break. We've had, as you know, many hospitalizations. We are at
Mhm.
42 and counting. So she has literally spent almost as much time in the last 9 years, almost 10 in the hospital as she has out of the hospital. And I'm also her legal guardian and dealing with stuff on pretty much a daily basis.
Yeah.
Not necessarily her, but just dealing with the system. So one of the big ways that entrepreneurship has supported me is that when I need to schedule calls or I need to take a call because she's back in the emergency room, I'm able to reschedule client calls or move things around or do what I need to do in order to accommodate that, without guilt and without having a manager going,
Hey, what's up with this? This is your 16th trip down to Health and Human Services. What gives?
yeah, why did you have to go back to the Durham Sheriff's Department again? Yeah.
Yeah. Explain yourself, Lucy.
Mhm.
Well, and I think it's important to, what I want to say, draw a line between the solopreneur and the entrepreneur,
Mhm.
because you are not a solopreneur,
I
correct?
am not, no.
Yeah. How many people do you have on your team?
8.
8? And how long did it take you to kind of get to that point? Did
Um,
you start with a team or did you work your way
no,
into a team?
I worked my way into it. I started with one person working for me, and then I've had points where I've had nobody working for me. And I have expanded and contracted multiple times over the years. Um, which is why I have to think about where I'm at today. Um, some people are full-time, some people are part-time. I'm tending more towards full-time than part-time at this point, but it's taken me since 2016 to get to this point.
Yeah. Interesting that you built this out as your daughter is going through this tremendous life crisis as well.
Yep, it's been a whole thing.
That which brings us around to, you can use it as an excuse or you can use it as a motivation.
Right. And it's kind of interesting to me because I hear a lot of people say, well, I can't do such and such because I've got this other thing going on in the background. And I kind of chortled because I remember vividly the night where, you and I go way back.
Yes.
I was driving for Uber and I was building my business during the day. And I picked up a ride at UNC Hospital at 4:30 in the morning. And it was a 3-hour Uber ride. And I put gas in the car and I drove her all the way out to the coast and got her checked in where she needed to go. And I dialed a friend on the way home, and it happened to be Zofia. And Zofia literally talked to me 2.5 out of the 3 hours, if I remember correctly, driving home,
Keeping you awake.
keeping me awake because I'd been awake for well over 24 hours at that point. And I got home safely and crashed, slept about 3 or 4 hours, got up and did it again the next day.
Yeah. Yeah. So don't go into entrepreneurship if you're thinking it's going to be all rainbows and unicorns.
No, no.
um,
And my husband sent me money for gas to get me out to the coast. And then I sent him the money back, as soon as I got paid and tipped and all of that. Yeah, it was quite the time. It's been a journey, and it's not always been easy, and having to deal with my daughter and her health conditions and 3 younger kids and all of that. Yeah.
So how do you keep yourself sane? How do you keep yourself going? I know a lot of entrepreneurs kind of like mentally burn the bridge. I'm never having a job again.
Mhm.
How do you keep moving forward on the entrepreneurial path when it gets exceedingly difficult, like the day you just described?
Yeah, I I would say that to some extent failure is not an option for me. Um, I've contemplated going back into a corporate job, but then the next thing happens with my daughter. Um,
Yeah.
it's either going to be my business and my career that I'm dealing with it, or it's going to be my husband. And there's no nice way to say it, but one of us is going to be giving a ton to keep things going. And when he's got the stable job with the insurance. So that has left that, deal with the crap to me.
Yeah.
And, the thing to say is, I don't think that I am necessarily strong or whatever. Insanity is kind of a relative thing. But
Yes.
at the same
Depending on the day and the conditions.
right? But at the same time, I'm making the decisions I have to make within the constraints of the environment that I'm dealing with. And I'm making the best decision I can with the information available to me. And every single day I get up and I chip away just a little bit more at it. And that could be my health, my weight loss journey. It could be,
Well, yeah, that
different
is the
things
thing
are-
that we didn't even bring up is the bariatric surgery. What was it, 4 years ago now? 5?
5.5.
5.5.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I've
I mean, that's a serious medical condition and situation right there. Just the surgery, not even talking about the recovery time and the lifestyle changes that go with that.
But that's all
So
that
you're like
right?
my poster child for if she can do it, you can find a way.
But every single day is that, can I do it today? Can I do 1% better today? Can I just stick with it today? I don't have to worry about tomorrow. I just need to stick with it today. Can I do it today? And I get up and I just keep going. And it's like, can I just stick with my macros today? Right? Okay, I
Yeah.
got my protein in. Okay, I've got 40 more grams of protein I need to get. Check and done.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not about being perfect. Because Lord knows I'm sitting here drinking Dr. Peppers while we're doing this. And
Along with your protein shake. Yeah. Well, and here's the thing that I remind myself of as a recovering perfectionist. If something is worth doing, it's worth doing it badly.
Mhm.
If you can't, brush your teeth for the perfect, 2 minutes in front of the sink and floss and all of the things, then do 30 seconds in the shower.
Right.
If it's worth doing, it's worth doing badly. So just do the thing.
And do enough of it just to fake it, and I feel like one of the things that I learned in the digital marketing arena is I don't have to be the most brilliant marketer out there, although I'm pretty good at it. I just had to be better than most people. And I actually just had to be able to deliver consistently and actually do what I said I was going to do, not necessarily about delivering perfection.
Well, and there is no perfection,
There
right?
is none.
Because the thing with marketing is it's very experimental. I know no one wants to hear that. They want to know that this thing's going to fly. But the truth of the matter is until you put it out into the marketplace and seen the result, you don't know what the result's going to be. And so, yeah, there don't even worry about perfection. Get it out there, look at the results, make a data-driven choice and keep going.
You want to know how I make things go viral on social media?
Sure.
Volume.
There you go.
I try so many times, I eventually get lucky and one goes viral.
Yep.
That's my top.
It's like hitting home runs. You got to have the at bats and the swings.
You just
You
got
got to strike out.
and pay attention to what didn't work. And then eventually you'll be able to figure out what's but you can't even predict it. The posts that I've gotten that have gotten 20 million views, I would have never guessed. It was volume.
Yeah. I love that. So we are down to our last 60 seconds here. I'm going to encourage everyone who's joined us today, check out the show notes. Haley's got a wonderful gift that she brought with her. If you would like a conversation with her, I know she is available to discuss your particular business and marketing situation. Let's see, what else am I supposed to tell them, Haley? All of her social media is down there. Mine is down there. Make sure you take the leadership pitfall quiz. And next week, actually, we are going to be unleashing financial freedom. And it's the Women's Entrepreneurship Edition with Penelope Jane Smith. So if you are tired of being mansplained by a brosif who's only ever had a 9-to-5 job, this is the show for you because she deals with the ups and downs of being an entrepreneur, the intricacies of our weird cash flow and making it happen. So we're not broke at the end of the game. So we actually have some financial freedom that we're building along the way. So make sure you tune in with us next week. And until then, go out there, be bold and be beautiful.